The moment I stepped into that courtroom, my daughter Melissa let out a nervous giggle. My son-in-law Gregory just shook his head like I was a pathetic joke. But then the judge looked up. He went white as a sheet. His gavel slipped from his trembling hand as he whispered one name, a name nobody in that room knew. The scalpel. He was staring right at me. My family thought they were putting a senile old man in a cage. They had no idea they had just declared war on a ghost. It began as these things often do, with an insult I was meant to ignore. It was a Sunday dinner. I was sitting at the far end of a polished mahogany table, a piece of furniture so long it could have been a landing strip. My daughter Melissa and her husband Gregory Greg Walsh were holding court in their sprawling Los Angeles mansion. "The infinity pool is non-negotiable, Greg," Melissa said, her voice sharp. "It has to look seamless, like it's pouring right into the canyon." Us Greg, a man whose custom-made suits always seemed one size too tight, didn't look up from his phone. "Whatever you want, baby. As soon as this Ojai deal closes, you can have a pool filled with champagne." He was bragging, broadcasting his success. "It's a guaranteed 9-figure play." They were talking through me, discussing pool contractors, Greg's 9-figure deal, and Melissa's upcoming charity gala as if I were a piece of furniture. An old armchair they had inherited and didn't know where to put. I am Nathaniel Price, 71 years old, and I was invisible. Ever since Isabel, my wife, passed away 10 years ago, I had done what I thought was the right thing. I sold our large family home in Connecticut, a place filled with too many memories, and I bought the guest house tucked away on this massive property. I wanted to be close to my only daughter, Isabel's only child. I thought it was what she would have wanted. My grandson Tyler, who was 16, seemed to be the only one who recognized my presence. He looked down the long table. "Grandpa, my playoff game is next week. You want to come? We're playing Palisades." Before I could open my mouth, Greg cut him off, his voice slick with casual dismissal. He didn't even bother to look at me. "Tyler, don't bother your grandfather. He needs his rest. He's old." Melissa. My daughter giggled. It was a light, airy sound, but it cut deeper than a knife. "He's right, honey. Just let him be. He's probably tired just from sitting there." They decided for me. They diagnosed my energy levels, my desires, my entire existence without a single glance in my direction. I said nothing. I just looked down at the intricate pattern on my plate where a piece of asparagus had gone cold. They had turned me into a ghost in my own life, and the worst part was I had let them. I had mistaken my silence for patience. I saw now it was just permission. 3 days later, a sharp knock hit the door of my guest house. It was Greg. This was a rare event. He avoided my small house as if it carried a plague, probably because it lacked gold-plated fixtures. He was holding a ridiculously expensive bottle of wine, which he pushed into my hands with a salesman's smile. "For you, Nate. Top of the line." He knew I didn't drink. My cardiologist had made that perfectly clear after my bypass. This gesture wasn't kindness. It was stagecraft. Greg was always a salesman. He sold real estate dreams. He sold the image of a perfect family. I'd seen his type my entire life. They don't just enter a room. They assess its value. He didn't waste time. After one superficial comment about the weather, he got straight to the point. "Nate, I am sitting on the opportunity of a lifetime. A resort in Ojai. It's almost a done deal, but we hit a small regulatory snag. I just need a small bridge loan to clear the permits, just to show liquidity." And he leaned forward, his cologne overpowering. "I know you own this guest house outright. It's just sitting here. All you need to do is put a little leverage against it. $500,000. That's it." He sensed my silence and rushed to close the deal. 6 months tops. I'll give you back 700 grand. That's a 40% return, Nate. You can't beat that anywhere. I watched him. He wasn't just enthusiastic. He was desperate. A fine sheen of sweat was gathering on his forehead. "Greg, I said, my voice perfectly level. I'm 71 years old. I'm past my risk-taking days. My money is for my retirement, and frankly for my medical bills. The answer is no. The change was immediate. It was as if a mask had been ripped away. The smile vanished, replaced by a cold, reptilian fury. Unbelievable, he hissed. Just unbelievable. After everything we do for you. You live here on our land rent-free. I paid for this house, Greg, I interrupted quietly. And you won't lift a finger to help your own family. My God, you are one selfish old man. He said I lived on his land. He didn't know or had conveniently forgotten. When I bought this guest house 10 years ago, I didn't just buy the house. I also bought the 2-acre parcel of land his sprawling mansion was sitting on. His 99-year lease for a symbolic $1 a year was with me. He was living on my land. He had no idea. He threw the bottle of wine onto my coffee table with enough force to make me wince. You'll regret this, old man. You'll regret being so selfish. He stormed out, slamming the door. The vibration made the photograph of Isabel on my desk tremble. A week later, I woke up at 3 a.m. A dull ache was spreading across my chest, radiating down my left arm. It wasn't the sharp, stabbing pain of a heart attack, but the familiar, suffocating grip of angina. Stress. My cardiologist had warned me. Don't be a hero, Nate. Call for help. My first call was to the main house, to Melissa. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice thick with sleep and annoyance. Dad. What is it? It's the middle of the night. Honey, I'm not feeling right, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I've got chest pains. It's not terrible, but can you drive me to the clinic? Just to be safe. A heavy sigh came through the phone. It was the sound of profound inconvenience. Dad, seriously, I have the big charity gala meeting first thing in the morning. The whole committee is coming here. I can't. Just call 911 if it's that bad. Don't overreact. Click. She hung up. She didn't ask how bad the pain was. She didn't ask if I was scared. She told me I was overreacting. The ache in my chest tightened. It wasn't from my heart. It was from somewhere deeper. I called an Uber. I sat in the back of a Toyota Prius, clutching my chest, and let a stranger drive me to the emergency room. It was stress-induced angina. They gave me a nitroglycerin tablet and kept me for observation for 4 hours. By 9 a.m., they discharged me. I called another Uber to take me home. As we pulled up to the property's massive gates, I saw Melissa's pearl-white Range Rover. It wasn't parked at the main house. It was parked outside the Beverly Hills Spa, her charity meeting. They didn't just disrespect me. They didn't just see me as a resource to be tapped. They saw me as a nuisance, a problem to be managed, an errand to be ignored. And that was the moment I knew something had to change. I just didn't know how fast it was coming. The next morning, I was sitting with a cup of black coffee watching the fog burn off the canyon when a sharp, impatient knock echoed through my small house. It wasn't Greg. His knock was arrogant. This was professional. I opened the door to a man in a crisp uniform holding a digital scanner and a stiff white envelope. Nathaniel Price? He asked, his voice flat. I am. Legal Express Delivery. Sign here. I signed the screen. He handed me the envelope and was gone before I could close the door. It was heavy. Not with paper, but with intent. My hands were perfectly steady as I picked up a letter opener from my desk. The same one Isabel had given me 30 years ago. I slid it open and pulled out the contents. The words leaped off the page, cold and precise. It was a legal petition, a lawsuit, filed in Los Angeles Superior Court. The petitioners were Gregory Walsh and Melissa Walsh. The respondent was me. I scanned the first page, my vision narrowing. They were requesting an emergency hearing. They were seeking a conservatorship. The blood didn't drain from my face. It didn't rush to my ears. Instead, a cold, perfect clarity settled over me. They were accusing me, Nathaniel Price, of being mentally incapacitated. They claimed I was no longer capable of managing my own financial and medical affairs. They were claiming I was senile. It wasn't just an insult. It wasn't just greed. This was a legal execution. They wanted to erase me, to turn me into a non-person, a ward of the state with them holding the strings. They wanted to make my invisibility official, legally binding. I flipped the page. Exhibit A. The evidence. It was a 3-page diagnostic report from a psychological expert named Dr. Peter Lim. I read his assessment. He claimed I exhibited severe signs of dementia, paranoid delusions, and an inability to grasp financial realities. He gravely concluded that I was a danger to myself and my own assets. I stared at the name. Dr. Peter Lim. Peter Lim. A cold, dry laugh, more like a cough, escaped my lips. I had never met anyone named Peter Lim in my entire life. I didn't knock. I didn't hesitate. I held the legal petition in my hand, the thick paper a stark white against my age-spotted skin, and I walked. I walked out of my small house across the perfectly manicured lawn that separated my world from theirs, and straight toward the main house. The glass doors to the patio were open. I could hear the sound of ice clinking in glasses and light vapid music playing. They were by the pool, just as I knew they would be. Melissa was laid out on a chaise lounge, sunglasses on a magazine, balanced on her stomach. Greg was standing by the outdoor bar, pouring himself another cocktail. They looked relaxed, untroubled, like two predators who had just set a trap and were waiting patiently for their prey to bleed out. I stepped onto the patio. The music stopped. My shadow fell across Melissa. She sat up, startled, pulling her sunglasses down. "Dad, what are you doing? You're interrupting our—" Her voice trailed off when she saw the papers in my hand. She didn't look at my face, she looked at the papers. Greg turned around, a fake smile plastered on his face. "Nate, we were just—" Then he saw the petition. The smile didn't just fade. It inverted into a sneer of annoyance before he quickly masked it with false concern. I held up the envelope. "What is this?" Melissa flinched, looking away toward the pool, unable to meet my eyes. But Greg was a performer. He put his drink down, wiped his hands on a towel, and crossed his arms. He was taking a position of power. "Dad," he said, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "We were hoping you wouldn't have to see it like this. We were going to talk to you right before the hearing." "What is this?" "It's for your own good," Greg said, stepping forward. "Look, after that little heart attack incident last week, Melissa and I, we realized you just can't take care of yourself anymore. You're forgetting things. You're confused." "I had indigestion, Greg." He waved his hand, dismissing my reality. "That's what you think it was. But you were in pain. You were disoriented. What if it's worse next time you need someone to manage things for you? Someone to protect your finances, to make sure your bills are paid, to handle your medical decisions before you hurt yourself." He was gaslighting me, using the very incident they had ignored as proof of my incompetence. I looked at my daughter. "Melissa, this is what you want. You're signing a paper that says your own father is insane." She finally looked at me, but her eyes were cold, reflecting the bright blue of the pool water. "It's what's best, Dad. We're just trying to help. We love you." "Love," I said. The word felt like ash in my mouth. "You don't even know the meaning of the word." That's when Greg's patience snapped. The mask of the concerned son-in-law fell away, revealing the vulture underneath. He laughed. A short, sharp, ugly sound. "See you in court, old man," he sneered. Frankly, this just proves our point. You're paranoid. That's exactly what Dr. Lim said. He picked up his drink and raised it in a mock toast. You better go find yourself a public defender. Because I really don't think you can afford a real lawyer. That was it. That was the last straw. That was the moment the man they thought was a frail, forgetful old ghost died. And something else, something they couldn't possibly have prepared for, woke up. I walked back to the guest house. I closed the door, and the sound of the lock clicking into place was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of a line being drawn, a final definitive boundary. They thought this was the room of a senile old man, a quiet beige box for me to doze in, to be managed in, to be forgotten in. They had never not once seen the other door. It was a solid core door at the back of my walk-in closet, hidden behind a rack of old suits I never wore. It wasn't locked with a simple key. It was locked with a biometric thumbprint scanner. I pressed my thumb to the cold glass. The light flashed green, and a heavy deadbolt slid open with a quiet, expensive snick. I stepped inside. This was my real home. There was no bed, no recliner, just floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, 3 massive computer monitors, a wall of file cabinets, and a dedicated encrypted satellite phone system. The air was cool and still. Greg thought I was a retired pencil pusher, a simple accountant who had managed ledgers for some mid-level firm in Connecticut. He thought my greatest life achievement was saving enough for a comfortable retirement. He had no idea. 30 years ago in Washington, D.C., I wasn't Nate. CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, corrupt senators, and high-level politicians, they all had a different name for me. They called me the Scalpel. I was the lead forensic investigator for the Department of Justice. I was the man they sent in when the numbers didn't just look wrong, they looked impossible. I didn't just follow the money. I dissected it. I found the financial tumors, the hidden accounts, the secret ledgers that everyone else missed. I was the man who could, and did, send 12 high-profile executives to prison with a single spreadsheet. I walked away from all of it. I buried that man. I buried him the day Isabel got her first diagnosis. I traded my secure office and the thrill of the hunt for hospital waiting rooms and chemotherapy schedules. I did it without a second thought. I became a full-time husband, then a widower, then a father trying to reconnect with a daughter I barely knew, and finally an invisible grandfather. I let the Scalpel die because my family needed Nate. Today, Gregory Walsh and my daughter just gave the Scalpel a very good reason to come out of retirement. I sat down at the console. I bypassed my normal phone line and picked up the secure receiver. My fingers didn't tremble as I dialed the 11-digit number. It was a number I hadn't used in 10 years, but one I had never ever forgotten. It rang twice. A sharp, professional voice answered on the other end. Avery Hayes. Avery, I said. It's Nate Price. There was a pause, not of confusion, of shock, of recognition. Mr. Price. Her voice was suddenly breathless. My God, I thought you'd fallen off the face of the earth. My father, he asks about you all the time. He always wondered what happened to the Scalpel. I'm in Los Angeles, Avery. I need you here. Tomorrow. Bring your best team. The ones who know how to dig. Another pause, shorter this time. The shock was gone, replaced by the steel I remembered. Just say the word, Nate. What did they do? They filed for conservatorship, I said, my voice flat. They're claiming I'm senile. They want to take control of everything. A sound came through the phone. It was a laugh. Not a humorous one, but a short, sharp bark of disbelief. They're claiming you are senile. They have no idea, do they? They have no idea who they just tried to put in a cage. Her voice was all business now. Understood, Scalpel. I'm on my way. Just tell me, where do you want me to make the first cut? Avery Hayes arrived at 10 a.m. sharp. She didn't look like a high-powered Los Angeles attorney. There was no flashy car, no $1,000 handbag. She wore a simple dark pantsuit, her hair was pulled back into a severe bun, and her eyes were the color of cold steel. She carried a single slim briefcase. She was the exact opposite of Gregory Walsh. She was substance, not style. She was her father's daughter. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. She stepped into my hidden office, her eyes sweeping the room, once taking in the servers, the monitors, the locked file cabinets. She gave a single appreciative nod. "They really have no idea, do they?" she said. It wasn't a question. "They think I'm a confused old man," I replied, sliding the petition across my desk. "They've provided their proof. Exhibit A. A Dr. Peter Lim." Avery picked up the document. She didn't read the whole thing. Her eyes just scanned the name and the signature. "Dr. Peter Lim, psychological evaluation. Got it." She snapped her briefcase open, produced a tablet, and tapped the name into a secure database. "Give me 3 hours," she said. "Take 2, I replied. She smiled, a thin, sharp smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll call you in 1. She left as quietly as she arrived. For the next hour, I didn't just wait. I began my own work. I started mapping out the financial architecture of Walsh Holdings GP and the other LLCs I knew he'd created. I was building the skeleton. Avery was going to bring me the flesh. My secure line buzzed exactly 58 minutes later. I picked it up. "Nate. Avery. That was fast." "It wasn't hard," she replied, her voice crisp, digital, and devoid of emotion. "When they're this sloppy, the threads are just lying on the floor waiting to be pulled." "Nate, you're not going to believe this." "Try me." "Okay. First, Dr. Peter Lim is not a psychologist." I waited. "He's not a psychiatrist. He's not a neurologist. He's not even a general practitioner." I could feel the but coming. "What is he, Avery?" "He's a dentist." I let the word hang in the air. A dentist. A man who scrapes plaque and fills cavities. A man who had signed a legal document declaring me mentally incompetent. The sheer naked arrogance of it was breathtaking. "A dentist," I repeated, my voice flat. "Or he was a dentist," Avery corrected. "The California Dental Board revoked his license 5 years ago. Permanently." Now we were getting somewhere. This was the first real piece. "For what? Take your pick," she said. I could hear her typing. Massive insurance fraud, billing for non-existent surgeries. And his specialty, illegally prescribing opioids. Thousands of pills. He was running a pill mill out of a strip mall in Reseda. So, Greg hadn't found an expert who could be bribed. He had found a criminal. A disgraced, disbarred professional desperate for money and already compromised. A man with nothing left to lose. This revelation, however, led to the real conflict. The question that mattered more than the answer. "Avery," I said, leaning forward. "That's specific. That's not a name you find on Google. A high-flying real estate developer like Greg doesn't just know a disgraced dentist from a Reseda strip mall. How did he find him?" "That," Avery said, her voice tightening, "is what I spent the last 40 minutes digging into." You're right. It wasn't a social connection. It wasn't a random find. It was a financial one. Go on. "I'm looking at Lim's criminal file right now. When he was arrested 5 years ago, he was facing 10 felony counts. Bail was set at $100,000. He didn't have it. A bail bondsman?" I murmured, my mind already connecting the dots. Exactly. A bondsman covered the note, but the bondsman required a guarantor. Someone to co-sign to put up the collateral in case Lim skipped town. I felt a coldness settle in my chest that had nothing to do with my heart condition. "Who guaranteed the bond, Avery?" She paused, just for a second, to let the impact land. A shell corporation, an LLC registered in Delaware, with a single-purpose asset management. What's the name of the company? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Walsh Holdings GP, she said. My God. I leaned back in my chair. The pieces didn't just fall into place. They slammed together. Greg hadn't found Dr. Lim last week. He hadn't bribed him last month. He had owned him for 5 years. He paid the man's bail. He likely paid for his defense lawyer. He had kept this dirty, compromised asset on a leash hidden in his back pocket for half a decade. Waiting for the day he would need a doctor to sign a piece of paper. This wasn't an impulsive act of greed, because I refused his loan. The loan request. That was just him testing the waters. This was a contingency plan. This was premeditated. He had been planning to declare me incompetent and seize my assets for years. Avery, I said, my voice low and hard, you've disarmed their primary weapon. You neutralized the medical expert. Now it's my turn. You keep digging on the legal side. Find everything you can on Lim's case files. Find the name of the lawyer Greg hired. I'll handle the numbers. She nodded already on her way out the door. Be careful, Scalpel. They should have been, I replied. I closed the door to my office, the world shrinking to the glow of my 3 monitors. This was where I lived. Not in the quiet guest house, but here inside the data. Greg thought I was a relic. He thought finance in my day was done on paper ledgers with green visors. He had no concept of what I was. I was a digital ghost, and I was about to haunt every server he had ever touched. I started with the company that paid Lim's bail, Walsh Holdings GP. It was a Delaware LLC, of course. Anonymous. Shielded. Greg was sloppy, but he wasn't stupid. He knew the basics of asset protection. He had layered his corporate structure. Walsh Holdings was owned by Ojai Crest Properties LLC, which was in turn owned by the Walsh Family Trust. A nice little nesting doll of legal entities designed to make it impossible to see who really owned what. But he made an amateur's mistake. A critical, fatal error. He was arrogant, he was in a hurry, and he was cheap. To register all these different LLCs to file the paperwork with the Secretary of State in Delaware and California to set up the bank accounts, he used the same personal email address for every single one. It was an old address, a burner he probably thought was clever. Greg Walsh, hotmail.com. An account he likely hadn't logged into for years. An account he thought was long dead and buried. He didn't know that old email servers never truly delete anything. I didn't need to hack his email. That would be illegal, and I was going to do this by the book. But I didn't need to read his mail. I just needed to see who he was talking to. I ran the email address through a series of databases. I still had access to backdoors into the financial mainframe that the DOJ had set up decades ago and forgotten to close. I was looking for patterns. Correspondence with banks, wires, loan applications. Within 20 minutes, I had a hit. A big one. The email address was tied to a secure data room, a virtual vault where lenders and borrowers exchanged sensitive financial documents. And Greg had been very, very busy. The data room wasn't with a normal bank, not a Wells Fargo or a Chase. It was with a private equity firm. A name that made the hair on my arms stand up. Citadel Apex Capital. These weren't bankers. They were vulture capitalists. They don't give loans to stable businesses. They find desperate men like Greg, men who have already been turned down by everyone else, and they offer them a lifeline. A lifeline attached to an anchor. I didn't have access to the data room itself, but I had access to the server logs. I could see the file names. I could see the email subjects. And that's all I needed. It was a bloodbath. Greg's 9-figure deal in Ojai wasn't a sure thing. It was a categorical disaster. He hadn't just hit a snag. He had run out of money halfway through construction. He had faked his liquidity reports to get the initial loan. He had lied to his contractors who were now filing liens. He hadn't just blown a few million. The logs showed a total capital burn of $50 million. $50 million. And Citadel Apex had found out. The emails were no longer polite. They were frantic. A flood of automated default notices. Then the personal emails. Greg begging for an extension. Just another 60 days. The project is solid. A temporary cash flow problem. And then the final email. The one that explained everything. It was from Citadel Apex, sent 1 week ago, the day after I refused Greg's $500,000 loan request. It was a capital call. The fund wasn't just angry. They were activating the emergency clause in their contract. They were demanding an immediate lump sum interest payment, not $500,000. $5 million. They gave him a deadline. 10 business days. If he didn't pay, they wouldn't just seize the Ojai property. They would activate the cross-collateralization clause in his contract, a clause I was certain he had signed without reading, which meant they would seize everything. His Walsh Holdings Company, the mansion, Melissa's Range Rover, every penny in every account tied to his name. They were going to wipe him out. I stared at the screen, the pieces clicking into place with a horrifying, perfect logic. He didn't need my $500,000 as a bridge loan. He needed it as a desperate good-faith payment to hold off the wolves. And when I said no, he activated his contingency plan. The plan he had been sitting on for 5 years. He didn't just want my little guest house. He wasn't suing me to get control of my retirement fund. He was suing me because he was bankrupt. He was suing me to get his hands on my entire estate, an estate he clearly believed was worth far more than the $500,000 he'd asked for. He needed to liquidate everything I owned, not to build his resort but to save his own skin. He wasn't just trying to rob me. He was trying to sacrifice me to save himself. A new question formed in my mind. A cold, hard question that settled in my gut. Wait a minute. Greg was bankrupt. He was facing a $5 million capital call. He was a cornered animal bleeding money from every pore. So where did he get the cash to attack me? A lawsuit like this, even a fraudulent one, isn't cheap. Lawyers, even the bottom-feeding kind he would hire, demand retainers. They don't work on credit. And Dr. Lim, a disgraced, disbarred criminal, he wouldn't have signed his name to a piece of perjury for a promise. He would have demanded cash up front and lots of it. Where did Greg, a man who couldn't pay his own bills, get $50,000 or $100,000 in liquid cash to file this suit? My mind flashed back to the Sunday dinner, to Greg bragging about his Ojai deal, but also to Melissa. What was she bragging about? The pool numb. It was her charity, the upcoming gala, the fundraiser. My heart sank. When Isabel died, I took a portion of the money from the sale of our Connecticut home, several $1 million, and placed it into a charitable trust. I called it the Isabel Price Foundation. Its mission was to fund the kind of early-stage cancer research that might have saved her. I made Melissa the managing director. I thought it would give her purpose, give her a connection to the mother she lost. I was the founder, of course, with full oversight rights, but I had never exercised them. I trusted her. It was my wife's name. It was my daughter. I picked up the phone and dialed the private bank in Boston that managed the foundation's assets. A banker I hadn't spoken to in 5 years answered, his voice full of surprise when I identified myself. "Mr. Price, what a pleasure. We usually only hear from Melissa." "I'm sure you do," I said, my voice cold. "I'm invoking my founder's rights. I need a full detailed statement of all expenditures and transfers from the Isabel Price Foundation for the past 12 months. I need it in the next 5 minutes. Secure email." "Sir, that might take some time to compile." 5 minutes, I said, and I hung up. My secure inbox chimed 3 minutes later. The PDF was attached. I opened the file. My hands were perfectly still. I looked at the top line. The total asset value. It was supposed to be well over $3 million. The number staring back at me was 412,000. I scrolled down, my blood turning to ice. The foundation was hemorrhaging money. I saw the usual small donations I expected. 5,000 to a research lab here, 10,000 to a hospice there. And then I saw them. The other charges. Administrative fees, consulting fees, event planning services. They were massive. $150,000 paid out 2 months ago. The recipient, Walsh Holdings GP, Greg's company. He had billed his wife's charity for consulting. Another charge, $80,000, for gala planning services. The vendor was listed as LA Premier Events LLC. It took me less than 60 seconds to run the name. It was a shell company registered 3 months ago. Its corporate address was a P.O. box in Van Nuys, and the sole proprietor listed on the filing, Gregory Walsh. He was paying himself $80,000 to plan his own party. But the final devastating, soul-crushing piece of evidence wasn't in the line items. It was in the proof of payment. I clicked on the links to the scanned checks. The bank provided them for all transactions over $20,000. The check for $150,000 to Walsh Holdings. The check for $80,000 to LA Premier Events. I looked at the signature line. The elegant, flowing signature authorizing the transfers. It wasn't Greg. It was Melissa Walsh. I closed my eyes. I had prepared myself for Greg's corruption. He was a snake, and snakes bite. It's their nature. I had even in some part of my heart prepared to find that Melissa was weak, foolish, manipulated. That Greg had tricked her or bullied her into it. But this wasn't weakness. This was active partnership. This was complicity. These were her signatures, clear as day. She wasn't just being manipulated. She was an active participant in the looting of her own mother's legacy. She was stealing money meant for cancer patients, stealing it from a fund named after her mother. And she was using that stolen money to what? To fund her husband's collapsing fantasy? No. It was worse. I looked at the dates. The first major transfer was 6 weeks ago. The second was 3 weeks ago. This was the seed money. This was the money they were using to pay the lawyers to have me declared insane. They weren't just robbing me. They were using Isabel's memory to finance the execution of her husband. I had thought there was a line of decency, of family, of basic human compassion that my daughter would not cross. I was wrong. She wasn't just lost. She wasn't just weak. She was a co-conspirator. And in that moment, she stopped being the victim in this story. She stopped being my daughter. She became the enemy. I stared at Melissa's signature on the scanned check, the elegant loop of her M, the signature that had paid the lawyer to declare me insane using her mother's money. In that moment, the grief I felt, the shock, the profound sadness, it didn't just fade. It evaporated. It was replaced by something else. Something cold, sharp, and perfectly clear. The scalpel was back in surgery. I picked up the secure line. "Avery?" She answered on the first ring. "Nate. I'm already digging into the law firm they hired. They're bottom feeders, but they're known for—" "It doesn't matter." I cut her off. My voice sounded different even to me. It was flat hard, like polished steel. "Change of plans, Avery." "What? What change of plans?" "We are no longer on defense," I said. "We are not going to disprove their case. We are going to end them. We are going to rip this entire thing apart, root and stem. I am done." There was a silence on the line. "Nate," she said, "what did you find?" "My daughter's signature. On checks from my wife's foundation. They used Isabel's money to finance this attack." "My God, Nate." "Save your sympathy," I said. I need data. You found the vulture fund he's in bed with, the one that's about to wipe him out. I need their name. Now. I heard the rapid, precise click of her keyboard. He's in default to a fund called Citadel Apex Capital. Nate, these guys are monsters. They don't negotiate. They just liquidate. I know exactly who they are, I said. And for the first time in a decade, a cold, thin smile touched my lips. Citadel Apex Capital. I wasn't just familiar with the name. I was familiar with the man who built it from scratch. Jim Callahan. Avery didn't know. Nobody knew. 30 years ago, back in Washington, D.C., Jim Callahan was just a brash, arrogant young trader who had gotten himself tangled up in the Enright Corporation scandal. The SEC was going to indict him. They were going to charge him with conspiracy and throw him in federal prison for 20 years. They were convinced he was part of the fraud. They were wrong. He was greedy, yes. Arrogant, absolutely. But he wasn't a criminal, not then. I was the lead investigator on that case. I was the one who spent 3 sleepless nights digging through the server data past the doctored ledgers and found the exculpatory evidence. The original time-stamped trades that proved Jim was a victim of the fraud, not a participant. I saved him. I saved his career. I saved him from prison. I did it because it was the truth, and my job was to make the books balance. Jim Callahan went on to build Citadel Apex into a billion-dollar empire. He never forgot. He had called me once 10 years ago after Isabel passed away. His voice was quiet. Nate, he'd said, I know what you did for me. If you ever need anything, a new life, a new career, a blank check, you just call. I never called. Until today. Avery. I said, my voice all business. I'm going to handle Citadel Apex. I need you to do something else. Immediately. I need you to draft a writ of seizure. A writ? On what grounds? We don't have a judgment, Nate. You will, I said. I switched lines, my fingers already dialing a number I knew by heart. A private direct line to Jim Callahan's personal office. His assistant tried to block me. Mr. Callahan is in a board meeting. Tell him the scalpel is on the line, I said. Tell him it's about Enright. I was on hold for less than 3 seconds. Nate? His voice was booming, confident, but held a trace of fear. The fear of a ghost from the past. Nate Price, is everything okay? Hello, Jim, I said. It's been a long time. I'm not calling about the old days. I'm calling to cash in my chip. Silence. Then one word. Name it. You have a loan out to a man named Gregory Walsh, a project in Ojai. He's in default. He's bankrupt. Walsh, I heard him typing. Yeah, a $50 million disaster. My team is moving to seize his assets on Monday. The man's a fool. I don't want you to seize his assets, Jim. I want you to sell me the debt. All of it. The note, the collateral, the default. Everything. Sell it to you, Nate. It's toxic paper. I'm not buying it as an investment, I said. I want to be his sole creditor. I will wire the full outstanding principal, the $5 million, right now. From a blind trust. No paper trail back to me. Just a quiet transfer of ownership. He was smart. He didn't ask why. You want to be the monster, Nate? Fine. You saved my life. It's the least I can do. He barked orders to someone off phone. My lawyers will execute the transfer. It'll be done in an hour. The debt is yours. Thank you, Jim. No, Nate, he said, his voice deadly serious. Thank you. Good hunting. I hung up. I called Avery back. It's done, I said. Citadel Apex no longer holds the note. I do. Avery gasped. I could hear her sharp intake of breath. Nate, you bought his debt. You're his bank. I'm his nightmare, I corrected. Now finish drafting that writ of seizure. He is in default on a $5 million loan. To me. I want the lien on that mansion. I want his cars. I want his Walsh Holdings LLC. I want it all. I'll have the server at his door in an hour. No, I said. No. You hold that paper. He's expecting a fight over my sanity. He has no idea his entire life is on the line. We are not going to serve him. We are not going to warn him. I looked at the date on the petition. The court date. We are going to walk into that courtroom, and we are going to hand it to him, right in front of the judge. We are in a long, fluorescent-lit hallway outside Department 5B. Avery Hayes looks at me, her face impassive, holding a single slim briefcase. Nate, are you ready? I adjusted the cuffs of my shirt. I wasn't wearing the soft knit sweaters and corduroys they were used to. I wasn't wearing the clothes of a man fading into beige invisibility. Today I was wearing armor. It was a charcoal gray single-breasted suit from Savile Row. I hadn't worn it in over a decade. The last time I put it on, I was stepping into a hearing room to testify before the Senate Banking Committee. It still fit perfectly. I had my hair cut. I was clean-shaven. I was not the man they thought I was. I was the man I had been. I'm ready, I said. The doors opened. We walked in. The courtroom was small beige and smelled of stale coffee and cheap floor wax. It was exactly the kind of joyless room where lives are quietly dismantled. Greg and Melissa were already seated at the petitioner's table. They were whispering, giddy with anticipation. Their lawyer, a man in a shiny suit with too much gel in his hair, was shuffling papers looking supremely confident. Then they saw me. I watched my daughter's face. She looked up, saw me in my suit, and a nervous, suppressed giggle escaped her lips. She put her hand over her mouth, but her shoulders were shaking. She leaned over and whispered something to Greg. I could almost hear it. Look at him. Dad thinks this is a funeral or something. Greg just looked at me. His eyes raked over my suit, my posture, and he just smirked. He shook his head slowly, a look of profound, pitying contempt on his face. To him, this wasn't dignity. This was a pathetic last-ditch effort, a dying animal puffing up its fur. His lawyer glanced at me, sized me up as a frail 71-year-old man playing dress-up, and dismissed me. He turned back to his notes. They had no idea. I sat down at the respondent's table. Avery placed her slim briefcase on the table and sat beside me, a pillar of quiet, coiled strength. We said nothing. We just waited. All rise, the bailiff intoned, his voice bored. We stood. The judge entered from a side door, robed, looking tired. He looked like a man who had seen too much and was paid too little. He settled into his high-backed chair, the leather groaning under his weight. Please be seated. He put on a pair of gold-rimmed reading glasses and picked up the day's docket. His nameplate read, Judge John Carmichael. Good morning, he mumbled, his voice a monotone. We are here for the first item on the docket, case number 881B, in the matter of the conservatorship of Nathaniel Price. He read the name, then, as procedure dictated, he looked up from his papers. He looked over the top of his glasses to identify the respondent. He looked right at me. The air left the room. The judge didn't just pause. He froze. His face, which had been a mask of tired bureaucracy, went white. Ashen. His eyes, magnified by the glasses, widened in disbelief. The cheap ballpoint pen he was holding slipped from his fingers. It clattered loudly onto the wooden desk, the sound echoing in the dead-silent courtroom. Greg and Melissa were staring at him, confused. Their lawyer looked up, annoyed by the interruption. The judge's hand, the one that had dropped the pen, was visibly shaking. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He leaned forward, forgetting himself, into the gooseneck microphone on his desk, and in a voice that was meant to be a whisper but was caught and amplified, a voice of pure, unadulterated shock, he said one thing. My God, Is that, is that really him? Every head in the courtroom swiveled. They weren't looking at the judge anymore. They were all staring at me. Greg and Melissa's faces were blank with confusion. What was happening? This wasn't part of their plan. I recognized him too. Oh yes, I recognized him. John Carmichael. But the man I knew wasn't a 60-year-old judge with a weary face. The man I knew was a 35-year-old assistant U.S. attorney, terrified, ambitious, and in way over his head. He had been handed the biggest case of his young career, the Enright Corporation fraud. $1 billion house of cards. And he was losing. His case was falling apart. His star witnesses were discredited. He was about to lose, and it would have ended his career before it began. Until his expert witness took the stand. I was that expert witness. I was the man they brought in when the numbers were a tangled mess of lies. I was the one who in a single day took $1 billion fraud and laid it bare on a single spreadsheet for the jury to see. I was the one who put 12 CEOs and their accountants in prison. John Carmichael hadn't just known me. I had made him. I had handed him his career on a silver platter. Judge Carmichael's face was pale. He gripped the edges of his desk. He was no longer looking at a senile old man. He was looking at a ghost from his past. He was looking at the man they used to call the scalpel. He finally tore his eyes away from me and slowly, deliberately turned his gaze to the petitioner's table. He glared at Greg's slick, smiling lawyer. "Counselor," the judge said, his voice no longer tired, but sharp, cold, and dangerous. "Are you aware of who your respondent is?" The lawyer, baffled, stood up. He's Nathaniel Price, Your Honor. A retiree." Judge Carmichael let out a short, harsh breath. It wasn't a laugh. It was a warning. "No, counselor," he said, his voice ringing through the silent room. "That is the scalpel Price. Good luck. You're going to need it." Greg's lawyer, a man named Fierro, looked like he had just swallowed a bug. He was visibly sweating. He looked over at Greg, who made a sharp, furious gesture with his hand. "Get on with it." Fierro, visibly rattled by the judge's reaction, shuffled his papers. "Your Honor, the petitioners call our first and primary witness to the stand, Dr. Peter Lim." A side door opened. A small, greasy man in an ill-fitting suit scurried into the courtroom. He looked less like a doctor and more like a man who lives in a basement. He avoided looking at anyone, especially the judge. He took the stand, his hand trembling as he was sworn in. Fierro, trying to regain his footing, began. "Dr. Lim, did you have occasion to evaluate the respondent, Nathaniel Price?" "I did," Lim said, his voice oily and rehearsed. He was reading from a script. "I conducted a full psychological workup." "And what were your findings?" Dr. Lim put on a pair of smudged glasses. "Mr. Price presented with severe signs of cognitive decline. His short-term memory is frankly non-existent. He exhibits classic symptoms of paranoid delusion, particularly concerning his family's finances and their intentions toward him." I sat perfectly still. He was describing the man they wanted me to be. "In your professional opinion, Dr. Tim," Fierro pushed on, "is Mr. Price capable of managing his own affairs?" "Absolutely not," Lim said, shaking his head with faux sadness. "He is a danger to himself and his own assets. He requires immediate full-time supervision." Fierro smiled, a weak, triumphant little smile. "Thank you, Doctor. Your witness." He sat down, looking relieved. Avery Hayes stood up. She didn't have a stack of papers. She didn't have a laptop. She held a single piece of paper as she walked slowly toward the witness box. The courtroom was silent. "Good morning, Dr. Lim," she said. Her voice was polite, quiet, but it cut through the room like a scalpel. "Or perhaps I should call you Mr. Lim. It is Mr., isn't it?" Lim blinked, confused. It's Doctor." Is it your honor I have no record of Mr. Lim being a licensed psychologist, or a psychiatrist, or a neurologist? She turned back to him. Mr. Lim, what kind of doctor are you? I have a medical background, he stammered, looking at Fierro for help. Fierro jumped up. Objection, relevance, this is character. Overruled. Judge Carmichael snapped, his eyes fixed on Lim. Sit down, counselor. The witness will answer the question. What is your medical background, Mr. Lim? Lim swallowed. I was a dentist. A murmur went through the court. Greg's face was white. A dentist, Avery repeated, letting the word hang in the air. Or to be more accurate, a former dentist. Isn't that right, Mr. Lim? I'm retired, he lied. Retired. Avery's voice was sharp. Or was your license to practice dentistry permanently revoked by the state of California in 2019? Lim started to shake. That's not... It's a public record, Mr. Lim. Avery continued, relentless. Revoked for gross misconduct, specifically for insurance fraud and for operating an illegal prescription pill mill out of your Reseda office. Is that correct? Lim had no answer. He was a cornered rat looking wildly between Greg and the judge. Greg's lawyer was on his feet again. Objection. Objection. This is badgering. This is cross-examination, counselor, the judge barked. And it's fascinating. Please continue, Ms. Hayes. Avery took a step closer to the box. Just one more question, Mr. Lim. For your expert opinion. Did you or did you not receive a payment of $25,000 from a corporation named Walsh Holdings GP 3 days before you signed this fraudulent diagnosis? Objection! Fierro screamed, his voice cracking. Speculation, no foundation. Avery didn't even look at him. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, I have the bank transfer record right here. She walked to the overhead projector and placed the single sheet of paper onto the glass. The image flashed onto the wall, a stark black and white receipt font for the entire courtroom to see. From Walsh Holdings, GP, to Peter Lim, amount $25,000, all memo consulting, Judge. Carmichael's face turned a deep, furious red. He glared at Lim, who looked like he was about to be sick. Mr. Lim, the judge's voice was a low growl of thunder. You are under oath. You have just committed blatant, egregious perjury in my courtroom. You have filed a fraudulent document with this court in a criminal conspiracy with the petitioners. He pointed a shaking finger at the bailiff. Bailiff, take this man into custody. He is under arrest for perjury. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut echoed in the stunned silence. Melissa let out a small, terrified squeak. Greg was rigid, staring at his star witness being led away. Their entire case had just been put in handcuffs. Greg's lawyer, Fierro, was completely adrift. He was sputtering, his notes scattered. His star witness was in handcuffs, his entire case had evaporated, and the judge was looking at him like he was something he'd scraped off his shoe. Greg was beyond pale. He was a furious, blotchy red. He was vibrating with rage. He grabbed Fierro by the sleeve and hissed something in his ear. Fierro, looking terrified of his own client, stood up shakily. Your Honor, he stammered, my client, Mr. Walsh, would like to take the stand. To clarify this unfortunate misunderstanding. Judge Carmichael raised an eyebrow. Oh, he does he? He wants to testify. After his primary witness was just arrested for perjury in a conspiracy with him. The judge looked at Avery. Ms. Hayes, any objection? Avery stood. Not at all, Your Honor. We would be delighted to hear what Mr. Walsh has to say. Very well, the judge said, his voice laced with ice. Mr. Walsh, take the stand. You are, of course, under oath. Greg shoved his way to the witness box, practically pushing the bailiff aside. He was trying to project confidence, but he was a man drowning, and he was just making more bubbles. He sat down, gripping the railing of the box until his knuckles were white. Your Honor, Greg started, his voice a slick, practiced performance of a wounded victim. He was trying to speak directly to the judge, ignoring Avery, ignoring me. This is a travesty. My wife and I, we are worried about him. That's all this has ever been about. He pointed a finger at me. He is confused. He's paranoid. He locks himself in that little house for days. He hides his finances. He accused me of trying to steal from him, for God's sake. All we wanted to do was help him, to protect him from himself. And now this. He was trying to look heartbroken. It came across as monstrous. He's not lucid, Your Honor. He doesn't know what he's doing. Fierro, seeing an opening, asked, "So your only motivation was concern for his well-being?" 100%, Greg said, oozing false sincerity. Thank you, Fierro said, sitting down, looking as if he'd just dodged a bullet. Avery stood up again. She walked toward him, not with aggression, but with a kind of surgical curiosity. Mr. Walsh, she began, her voice quiet. You just testified under oath that my client, Mr. Price, is not lucid and paranoid. That's right, Greg said, puffing up. He's deeply confused. And his confusion, it centers on his finances, you said. Yes, absolutely. He doesn't understand money. He's from a different time. He doesn't grasp modern finance. I see, Avery said, nodding. Is that why you believe he's not lucid, because he doesn't understand modern finance? It's a major part of it, yes, Greg said confidently. So when you approached him 2 weeks ago and asked him to give you $500,000, you were, what? Testing his lucidity. Greg's face tightened. I was offering him an investment, a chance to be part of the family's success. You asked a man you believed to be confused and paranoid for $500,000. Avery asked, her voice still mild. Greg saw the trap and tried to dance around it. It was his refusal that proved our point. I offered him the deal of a lifetime. A golden opportunity. A guaranteed 40% return in 6 months on my Ojai resort project. It was a slam dunk. He turned to the judge again, playing the reasonable man. Your Honor, he refused. He said it was too risky. He was too senile, too scared to see a golden opportunity when it was staring him in the face. That's when I knew. That's when Melissa and I knew. He had truly lost it. He was no longer capable of making sound financial decisions. He was letting his paranoia get in the way of a fortune. He had done it. He had under oath linked his entire claim of my senility to my refusal to give him money. He had built his own gallows. Now Avery was going to kick the chair. A golden opportunity, Mr. Walsh? Avery asked. She was no longer curious. Her voice was cold. A slam dunk. Absolutely, Greg said, arrogant to the last. That project is gold. Is that why the project is currently $50 million over budget and facing 16 contractor liens for non-payment? The color drained from Greg's face. He stammered, That's a lie. That's privileged information. How? It's not privileged when you're in default, Mr. Walsh. Avery said, her voice rising, each word a hammer blow. And this golden opportunity is in fact a sinking ship, isn't it? Isn't it true that your primary lender, Citadel Apex Capital, found you in breach of your loan covenants and issued a capital call for $5 million due 10 days ago? Greg was speechless. He was literally opening and closing his mouth, but no sound was coming out. He looked at Fierro, who was staring at his client in pure horror. A $5 million demand, Mr. Walsh, and you didn't have it. You were, and are, completely, hopelessly bankrupt. Weren't you? No! Greg finally roared, his composure shattering. It's a temporary cash flow problem. The project is sound. Is it? You were bankrupt? Avery pressed, relentless. You had no money. Your credit was frozen. And yet, you found the money to hire Mr. Fierro. You found $25,000 in cash to bribe a disgraced dentist. She took a step closer. My question, Mr. Walsh, is, where did you get that money? Greg was trapped. He looked at Melissa. He looked at the judge. He had no answer. Avery provided it for him. You got it, she said, her voice dropping, filled with contempt. From a charity? You got it from the Isabel Price Foundation. At the sound of her mother's name, Melissa, who had been frozen in her seat, let out a tiny, choked sound. Isn't that right, Mr. Walsh? Avery thundered. When you were broke, when your empire was collapsing, you turned to your wife and you had her sign checks. You convinced her to steal from her dead mother's cancer charity. You can't prove that, Greg spat. I can, Avery said. She held up a new set of documents. $150,000 paid to Walsh Holdings for consulting fees. $80,000 paid to LA Premier Events, a shell company you own for gala planning. A total of $230,000 embezzled from a fund for cancer research. She turned and looked for the first time at Melissa. He didn't just lie to the court, Melissa. He lied to you. That's when my daughter broke. She shot to her feet, her face a mask of disbelief and rage, and she screamed at her husband. You lied to me. You told me those were legal administrative fees. You told me it was all approved. You were stealing from my mother. Greg finally completely lost it. All the charm, all the performance, all the arrogance boiled away, leaving only the raw, ugly, desperate man underneath. He stood up in the witness box, his face purple, and he pointed a shaking finger, not at Avery, not at Melissa. He pointed it at me. Shut up, Melissa! He shrieked, his voice cracking. Just shut up! This is all... It's his fault, all of it! That selfish old man. He had the money. He could have fixed everything. He just had to write a check, and he said no. He made me do it. It's all his fault. The courtroom was chaos. Melissa was sobbing a hysterical, ugly sound. Greg was screaming at her to shut up, his face a mask of purple rage. His lawyer Fierro was desperately trying to object, but Judge Carmichael just waved him into silence, his face a thundercloud. He banged his gavel, the sound cracking through the room like a gunshot. Silence! He roared. Mr. Walsh, you will sit down and be silent, or I will have you held in contempt. Madame, control yourself. Greg collapsed back into his chair, breathing hard. Melissa sank down, her sobs turning into choked, wet gasps. The room was deathly quiet, the only sound the click of the bailiff's radio. Judge Carmichael's eyes, cold and furious, swiveled from the wreckage of the petitioner's table to me. He stared at me for a long moment. The anger in his face softened, replaced by something else. Respect. And a deep, profound curiosity. Mr. Price, he said, his voice now calm, but carrying the full authority of the bench. Your opponents have made their case such as it was. He gestured to Greg. He has just confessed under oath to a litany of financial crimes, but the petition is still before me. Do you have anything you wish to say in your defense regarding your own competency? I rose to my feet. Slowly. I didn't lean on the table. I didn't waver. I stood straight, my hands clasped loosely behind my back. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. I looked at Greg. I looked at Melissa. And then I looked at the judge. Thank you, Your Honor. I said, my voice clear and strong. It echoed in the small room. But I'm not here today to argue about my sanity. I am not here to defend myself. My competency is not in question. My record speaks for itself. I paused, letting the words land. No, Your Honor, I continued. I didn't come here today to be a respondent. I came here to file a criminal complaint. Fierro leaped to his feet. Objection! This is theater! This is not the proper venue. Sit down, counselor, Carmichael roared. You opened this door. You brought this man into my court accusing him of delusion. The court will hear what he has to say. Proceed, Mr. Price." I turned my gaze to Greg. He was staring at me, his eyes wide with a new dawning horror. "Mr. Walsh has just confessed to part of it," I said, my voice flat, like an anatomist describing a corpse. "He confessed to embezzling $230,000 from a charitable foundation. My wife's foundation. The Isabel Price Foundation." I then turned my gaze slowly, deliberately, to my daughter. She was watching me, her face streaked with tears and mascara, her eyes pleading. "But he didn't act alone," I said, holding her gaze. "He couldn't. He needed a signature. He needed the signature of the foundation's director." I looked back at the judge. "And you, Melissa, daughter, you signed the checks. You knowingly and with full intent looted your own mother's legacy to fund your husband's lifestyle and to finance this pathetic attempt to seize my assets." Melissa let out a wail, a sound of pure animal despair. No, I didn't know. He told me." "You signed them," I stated, cutting her off. "It was not an accusation. It was a fact." Greg, seeing his wife crumble, found a new surge of desperate, cornered animal bravado. He stood up, knocking his chair over. He laughed. It was a high-pitched, hysterical, ugly sound. "You can't do anything to me!" he shrieked, pointing at me. You're a nobody! You've got nothing! You think you can... What? File a complaint. It's my word against hers, and you're just a sad, senile old man. You're living in a guest house. A guest house, you're broke. You have nothing. You are nothing." His voice was cracking, but he was triumphant. He believed it. He believed I was powerless. He believed the money was gone, that I had nothing left but my suit. I just waited. I let his voice echo and die. I let the silence return. I let him stand there, panting, a failed king on a stage of his own making. Then I smiled, a thin, cold smile. "Ah," I said, my voice quiet. "About that." I turned my head and gave a single slight nod to Avery Hayes. She stood. She said nothing. She reached into her slim briefcase and removed a single thick stack of documents bound with a blue legal cover. She did not hand it to the judge. She did not hand it to me. She walked across the aisle straight to the petitioner's table and placed the document on the table directly in front of Gregory Walsh. What is this?" Greg stammered, looking at the ominous blue cover. "That, Mr. Walsh," Avery said, her voice clear and ringing, "is an emergency notice of foreclosure and seizure." Greg's lawyer snatched the paper. His eyes scanned the first page. His face, which had been pale, turned the color of ash. This is impossible," Fiera whispered, looking at Avery. This is from Citadel Apex Capital. But that's not the date." Greg snatched the paper from his lawyer. "What is it?" "It seems you're a little behind on the news, Greg," I said, my voice conversational. "You were quite right. You defaulted on your $5 million loan to Citadel Apex. They were, as you know, preparing to seize all your assets. A terrible shame." Greg was staring at the paper, his hands shaking so violently he could barely read. This says the debt was sold." "Yes, it was," I said. "They were very motivated to sell. It was, as you said, toxic paper. And when you couldn't pay them, I stepped in. I bought that debt, Greg. All of it. The note, the loan, the collateral. Everything." I took a step forward. "You defaulted on your loan, Greg, but you didn't default on Citadel Apex. You defaulted on me." I let that sink in. I watched the last traces of color drain from his face as the blood-freezing, soul-shattering reality of his situation landed. "And I continued, am not as patient as Jim Callahan. I am not offering an extension. I am not renegotiating. I am calling the note. effective immediately. Greg looked up at me, his mouth open, a silent scream. I pointed at the mansion he lived in. The main house is mine. I pointed at the cars he drove. The cars are mine. I pointed at the shell companies he built. Your entire Walsh Holdings empire is mine. I pointed at the very suit he was wearing. Everything you thought was yours now belongs to me. I turned back to Judge Carmichael, who was watching this entire exchange with a look of pure, unadulterable awe. Your Honor, I said, my voice ringing with finality, this pathetic conservatorship hearing is over. I made a gesture to Avery and her document. The eviction hearing begins now. Greg was finished. A man who screams his own confession in a courtroom doesn't have many legal options. After his performance, it wasn't a trial. It was a sentencing. My evidence, the evidence Avery and I had compiled, was a precise, airtight coffin. The bank transfers from Isabel's foundation, the fraudulent invoices from his shell company, the perjured testimony he suborned from Lim, and of course the open and shut case of bank fraud he'd been running on the Ojai project. It was an avalanche of paper, and every single sheet had his name on it. He tried to fight. He hired a new, even more expensive lawyer, probably with money he didn't have. They tried to argue he was under extreme duress. They tried to paint me as a vindictive, manipulative mastermind who had entrapped him. It was a pathetic defense. It was like a rat caught in a steel trap, trying to blame the cheese. The district attorney, who had taken a very keen interest in the case after Judge Carmichael's report, didn't even break a sweat. They offered him a plea deal to spare the state a trial. He refused, arrogant to the very end. He still thought he could sell his way out of it. So they took him to trial. And they buried him. I didn't have to testify. Avery's documentation, my financial forensics, did all the talking. The jury was out for less than an hour. They found him guilty on 12 counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and aggravated embezzlement. The judge looked at Greg, this man who had stood in a courtroom and tried to destroy a man's life to cover his own crimes, and he made an example of him. He wasn't given a slap on the wrist. He wasn't sent to a white-collar country club prison. He was sentenced to 10 years in a state penitentiary. 10 years. I watched them lead him away, no longer in his custom suit, but in an orange jumpsuit. He was finally, truly out of cards to play. The books were balanced. Melissa was the hardest part. She was my daughter. She was Isabel's blood. But she was also a co-conspirator. The evidence was undeniable. Her signature was on the checks. She had sat there week after week living a life of luxury, knowing it was being paid for by money stolen from her mother's grave. Her lawyer approached me begging, pleading. Mr. Price, she was manipulated. She was a victim of psychological abuse. Greg controlled her. I looked at him. Did Greg hold the pen? Did he force her hand to write her own name? She is a grown woman. She made a choice. He asked me to speak to the DA, to ask for leniency, to write a letter in her defense to say she was a good person who made a mistake. I said no. I would not interfere. This was not about revenge. This was about consequences. I had spent 10 years allowing her to live without any. I had enabled her weakness, her greed, her casual cruelty. To step in now to save her from the fire she had helped set would be the final worst act of a failed father. She had to stand on her own. She had to face the ledger. She was indicted just as Greg was, but she was smart. Unlike Greg, she saw the end of the line. She took the plea. She pled guilty to felony misuse of charitable funds. The judge was less harsh. He saw her tears, he heard her testimony about Greg's control, but he also saw the bank statements. She was sentenced to 3 years of formal probation. She was ordered to pay back every single cent, all $230,000, to the Isabel Price Foundation. And finally, the judge added one last condition: 2,000 hours of mandatory community service. not picking up trash on the highway, not filing papers in an office. He assigned her to the Glenwood Gardens nursing home, specifically to the locked ward dementia and Alzheimer's unit. For the next 2 years, my daughter, the woman who tried to have her father declared legally senile so she could steal his money, would spend every weekend bathing, feeding, and cleaning up after men and women who were truly lost. Men and women who didn't know their own names, who couldn't remember their children's faces. I wanted her to see it. I wanted her to smell it. I wanted her to understand in her bones the reality of the weapon she had tried to use against me. It was a just sentence. It was perhaps the only education she had ever truly received. 6 months passed. The silence that fell over the property was absolute. The grand, ridiculous mansion that Greg and Melissa had built was gone. I had it sold at auction. The land it sat on the guest house, my guest house, I sold that too, all of it. The proceeds went to 2 places. Half went to refill and substantially grow the Isabel Price Foundation, which was now under new professional management. The other half went into a trust for my grandson Tyler, locked away until he turns 25. I was in the guest house. It was empty, just stacked cardboard boxes, the walls bare. I was in my hidden office packing the last of my files. The monitors were dark. The scalpel was going back into retirement. I heard a hesitant step on the porch. Not a knock, just a presence. I walked to the door. It was Melissa. She was transformed, but not in the way a spa or a new dress transforms a person. She was hollowed out. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a cheap, faded blue volunteer's smock with Glenwood Gardens embroidered on the pocket. Her hair was pulled back. Her face was pale thin. She looked 10 years older. The entitlement, the casual cruelty, the arrogant little giggle, all of it was gone. Burned away. Her hands, which were once perfectly manicured, were red and raw. She just stood there in the doorway, watching me tape up the last box. Her voice, when it came, was not the voice I remembered. It was a rasp. Quiet, rough, and dead. Why? I stopped what I was doing. I didn't turn around. Why what, Melissa? Why did you do it? She said, her voice trembling, not with sadness, but with a deep, exhausted rage. Why did you let it go so far? You knew. Don't pretend you didn't. You're him. You knew what Greg was. You knew what he was doing. She took a step into the empty room. You could have stopped us, at any time. When Greg asked for the $500,000, you could have just said, "No, I know you're broke." You could have shown me the papers then. You could have warned me. Her voice cracked, and a single hot, angry tear ran down her face. But you didn't. You let us. You let me sign those checks. You let us file that lawsuit. You sat there in your little house and you watched us destroy ourselves. You didn't have to ruin us. You didn't have to send him to prison. You didn't have to do this to me. She pointed at her cheap uniform. You wanted this. You wanted to punish us. I slowly taped the box shut. I pressed the tape down, smoothing it with my hand. Then I turned to face her. I looked at this stranger who was my daughter. Because if I had stopped you, Melissa, I said, my voice quiet, you would have learned nothing. You would have hated me for a week. You would have called me a paranoid, controlling old man. And then, you would have gone right back to him. You would have believed his next lie. You would have found another way to get him the money. You would have continued to bleed your mother's foundation dry, one gala at a time. I didn't let you do anything. I just let you be who you were. I walked over to my old desk. When you were 10 years old, you stole $50 from your mother's purse. You wanted a toy, and she had told you no. Melissa flinched, her eyes wide. She remembered. Isabel found out, I continued. She knew it was you and she cried. She cried for an hour in the bathroom thinking she had failed as a mother. And then she came out and she hugged you and she never said a word. She put $50 of her own money back in the purse. She forgave you because her heart was soft. She wanted peace. I looked at her, my eyes as hard and clear as glass. I believe in ledgers. The books must always balance, Melissa. You never paid for that first theft, so you just kept stealing. Bigger and bigger things. You didn't respect me. Greg didn't respect me. And neither of you, respected the memory of your mother. You didn't just cross a line, Melissa. You erased it. You danced on her grave for a swimming pool. She had no answer. She just wept. You didn't destroy yourselves, I said. You were already destroyed. You were just bankrupt, in every possible way a human can be. I just presented the bill. I picked up a single envelope from the desk. I held it out to her. This is the address of a studio apartment in Burbank. The first 3 months' rent is paid. There is a bus pass inside. After that, you are on your own. The books are clear. She took the envelope, her hand shaking. She looked at me one last time, searching for what? For her father. He was gone. She turned and walked away. I watched her go. I am 71 years old. I have retired twice in my life. The first time from my job. The second time from being an invisible, accommodating, silent old man. That day in court, I just decided to pick up the pen again. My name is Nathaniel Price, and my books are finally balanced. This entire ordeal taught me a painful, necessary lesson. I learned that silence should never be mistaken for weakness. For 10 years, I allowed my love for my family to blind me to their contempt. I thought patience was a virtue, but I learned that patience without firm boundaries is simply permission to be disrespected. True strength isn't about how loud you can shout. It's about knowing the precise moment to make your move and having the discipline to wait for it. I didn't want revenge. I wanted accountability. Sometimes the most profound act of love for oneself, and even for others, is to finally and decisively balance the books. What would you have done in my position? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and please like and subscribe if you believe that true respect is something that must be earned.